Good morning and welcome to the fourth session of the Safe Transportation for Every Pedestrian course. We are so happy to have been able to provide this training for you. There has been a tremendous amount of great discussion in this area. This is Victoria Beal at the Ohio LTAP Center, and I'm so pleased to have with me this morning my colleague Ray Brushart, who is going to wrap up the STEP materials, but I guess in a way even more pleased that we are going to be able to have our colleagues from the Ped Bike area in the safety section of ODOT's safety program join us as well for the second half of this morning's webinar. We have Caitlin Harley and Jeremy Thompson who will be going over Ohio specific information and programs on how quite a few of the countermeasures that are being discussed in the STEP program are actually being tried and tested and moved forward here in Ohio. So it'll be a great dialogue and we are so glad to have you here. If you wouldn't mind, somebody already did it. Want to make sure you know how it is that we're going to accept questions today, and that's through the question box. And when I said they already did it, I normally ask everyone to drop me just a quick note. Hello, good morning. I saw somebody put in still here. So that's great. We're happy to have you on. Want to make sure you know where that's at so we can keep the conversation moving. Also wanted to mention that in the handouts panel, we have for you not only Ray's slides for today, but we have additional documents that are going to pertain to Caitlin and Jeremy's presentations. So we encourage you as you're able to get those downloaded. And if you're not able, there is going to be a comprehensive email communication that's going to go out after today's webinar is finished. If not this afternoon, probably sometime tomorrow with links to all of the recordings and all of the documents. So, and I see one note here, good afternoon, actually from Uganda. Good afternoon, Sunday. It's so good to have you on here. So, all right, with that, Ray, I do believe we're ready to roll. Are you ready?
I am ready.
Thanks.
All right. Well, good morning, everybody, and good afternoon to Uganda. How's that? I don't get to say that every day, do I? So let's see where we left off here last time. Okay, so we went over the road diet project that took place on La Jolla Boulevard. Now, you might say, well, Ray, last time you pronounced it La Jolla. Well, you know, that's how we say it in Pike County, Ohio, but I've been corrected. So La Jolla it is. So they had a really good project there that involved 5 roundabouts, landscape medians, and angled parkings, and that did a good job of slowing the traffic speeds and improve pedestrian safety. And it also revitalized the businesses in that area. So very good project. And that really wrapped up the unsignalized improvements that are part of the STEP initiative. And so, but before we get into the signalized, the leading pedestrian interval, let's take a look at this guide here. It's called the Guide for Improving Pedestrian Safety at Uncontrolled Locations. It's from FHWA, and it provides guidance and suggested processes for selecting countermeasures, and it assists agencies in developing a policy to support the installation of countermeasures at uncontrolled crossing locations. And on this particular slide, you'll see that there is a link at the bottom, and you can download that for free. So it's a very good book for you to check out. And so one thing I wanted to go over here in this book that was important was this, the countermeasure selection process. And it's a 6-step process. And so I wanted to quickly highlight these 6 steps. And so we're going to follow the processes suggested in this guide because it offers countermeasure options based on road conditions, crash causes, and pedestrian safety issues. So the first step is called collect data and engage the public. And so there's the bullet points that fall under this step 1, collecting pedestrian crash and safety data, evaluating pedestrian accommodation policies that your agency has, initiate a pedestrian safety action plan, review pedestrian and traffic safety plans, and conduct a walkability audit. And so, you're going to need to do a careful review of your agency's existing plans and policies to help prepare for more in-depth data analysis and public involvement. And I do want to say there is another guide that I want everyone to be aware of. It's from FHWA that was released in 2017. It's called How to Develop a Pedestrian and Bicycle Safety Action Plan. So you can Google that book as well. Again, that is the 2017 How to Develop a Pedestrian and Bicycle Safety Action Plan. So I'll be sure to put that in the, maybe a note for that in the handouts. So let's talk about a few common crosswalk myths. See if we can dispel them. The first myth is that there is an MUTCD pedestrian volume warrant for marked crosswalks. Maybe you've heard that before, but in reality, there is no pedestrian volume requirement to mark a crosswalk that you can find in the MUTCD. The next myth is that research supports the removal of crosswalks. The reality is that marked crosswalks should not be removed without a plan for improving safety. So if you recall back in part 1 of this webinar, we talked about the city of Seattle, and they rethought some of their marked crosswalks, and but they did not remove them unless they had to come up with their safety plan before they did that. And then the third myth is not marking a crosswalk is safer than marking a crosswalk. I've heard that myself a few times. But the reality is that pedestrians can be expected to cross most types of roadways with or without marked crosswalks. We're talking about, you see pedestrians crossing all the time in lower speed roadways, especially residential roadways and things like that, just willy-nilly everywhere. But if we want to take a look at the higher volume, higher speed roadways, though, we find that research demonstrates that marked crosswalks alone along the high volume or high speed roadways are generally not sufficient to improve pedestrian safety. So in those areas, we need more than just a marked crosswalk. So that's a little bit behind step 1. And then we go to step 2, which is inventory conditions and prioritize locations. So taking an inventory of pedestrian crossings is an important step in this process, and it's a best practice to digitize information about pedestrian crossings, including information about traffic controls and conditions. And so we also want to classify pedestrian crossings as controlled versus uncontrolled. We want to denote the inventory roadway characteristics, which things like the speed of the roadway and volume, number of lanes, things like that. And we want to screen the network for high crash or high risk locations. We have some things at ODOT that's helpful for those last two. We have our TIMS software that helps to inventory roadway characteristics. And also we have our GCAT. I think Caitlin today might talk a little bit about GCAT. If we take a look at, here's a sample inventory form for your field guide. And so as we take a look at the top right of the form, you'll see that the area is called roadway conditions inventory. So it breaks it down into speed limit, total vehicles per day, travel lane configurations. And then we also have the pedestrian safety issues inventory. You can walk through each location to see if you have any noted conflicts at crossing locations or excessive vehicle speed, inadequate conspicuity or visibility, drivers not yielding to pedestrians and crosswalks. So that would show up in the crash history. Insufficient separation between pedestrians and traffic. Maybe you have a long crossing distance, or maybe there's no buffer, no landscape buffer, or on-street parking or bike lanes. So there's you can use that as your sample inventory form. Or here's another one here. This one comes from the city of Seattle. So they have this is the cities of Seattle's crosswalk inventory form. And so, they have a place where you can sketch what the crosswalk looks like. And then on the right, you've got places there to enter the information about the crosswalk or the street itself, other information, or even an action plan. And there's a link at the bottom of that. A lot of these slides that I'm showing you today will have a link on them to show you exactly where we got this information. There's another guidebook here from the NCHRP, National Cooperative Highway Research Program, called the Pedestrian and Bicycle Transportation Along Existing Roads Active Trans Priority Tool Guidebook. Now that's a mouthful, isn't it? But it is a very good guidebook, and the link to download that is at the bottom again. But this booklet gives us a step-by-step methodology for prioritizing improvements to pedestrian and bicycle facilities. And you can prioritize separately or together as part of a complete streets evaluation. And you'll find that you can be flexible with the information they give you, assigning goals and values that reflect those of the agency and community. And you can be transparent, broken down into a series of discrete steps that can be easily documented and communicated to the public. So,
hey Ray, quick question
yes.
for you. What is meant by controlled versus uncontrolled ped crossing? The presence of pavement markings, signs, is that what is meant by controlled? Or does it mean, is the location controlled by a traffic signal or stop sign?
Yeah, this is the uncontrolled is without a signal. So the first, like in last year's EDC program, they all those step countermeasures were for unsignalized locations. And now this year in step 5, they're including the leading pedestrian interval, which is at a signal. So that's what's meant there. So this booklet helps you, it's important if you're going to have public meetings. This guide here has some good information to help you document and communicate your information to the public. It'll help make you look good. Okay, so the tool uses GIS and a spreadsheet, as you can see here. So, and then there's, if you're wondering where I got that, there's yet another link here in this screen. I'm giving you a lot of information so you can do, your own research on this sort of stuff, but you can go to pedbikeinfo.org/APT and you can find the information from this Pedestrian and Bicycle Information Center. So then we move on to step 3, and this is where we have a careful review of pedestrian crash reports or data, because it's key to identifying the common safety issues. And by using GIS, you can identify clusters or corridors where crashes have occurred most often and prioritize where you may focus your attention with infrastructure improvements. And so there's a diagram crash reports, identify crash factors, lead an informal site visit, and then conduct a road safety audit. The road safety audit is a great way to engage many types of stakeholders and identify specific safety issues along priority corridors. Let's take a look at our crash data methodology. Here we have a list of some of the ways crash data can be looked at. And then on the next slide, we're going to cover the systemic approach, which FHWA is promoting. So in this slide, we see the high crash locations. You can document them by location or corridor. You can take the systematic approach, area-wide versus systemic approach, identifying roadway features. You know, like I know, like much like in my forward webinar that's starting on Thursday, you know, we take a look there at identifying similar roadway characteristics like curves on two-lane rural roads, and have special treatment for those curves. And it's the same with this sort of with the STEP program. You know, you can deploy crosswalk safety treatments across your entire agency. You know, especially if they're low-cost treatments, and get a lot of bang for your buck with the systemic approach instead of going at it, attacking only your hot spots that the data shows. So the systemic approach is a systemic approach to safety involves a widely implemented improvements based on high-risk roadway features correlated with specific severe crash types. So with this approach, you're being proactive, and you're looking at roadway features that present a certain level of risk. And you can find out more information about this approach at the link at the bottom of the page. Let's take a look at some of the risk factors. So when I say risk factors, we're talking about the number of crashes, injuries, fatalities, and what is the posted speed limit in those areas, high speed, low speed, what is the level of traffic, is it high, medium, or low? Are we looking at an undivided 4-lane roadway? How close is the location to a signal or a transit stop? Is there a pedestrian activated beacon or flasher? And then what are some other characteristics of the location? Is it near areas that have a lot of pedestrians, maybe senior citizens, maybe close to schools, even bars, etc.? Kind of makes you think of Columbus, the Short North area, or the OSU campus area. You know, a lot of pedestrians with bars and restaurants in those areas. Then we get to part 5, step 5, where we consult design and installation resources. So the point of the slide is to show that agencies need to follow national standards as well as guidelines. And so if there's anything about this webinar you could take away, is that I've shown you lots of booklets on guidelines, and also talked about information from different organizations. So not only AASHTO, but you know, FHWA, the National Committee of Uniform Traffic Control Devices, that's the recommending committee to the MUTCD. So there's lots of standards and guidelines out there. So I'm trying to arm you with a lot of information. So in the MUTCD, you know, it's got 9 different parts, but part 2 is all about your signs, which includes warning signs for pedestrian crossings. Part 3 is all about your pavement markings, including crosswalk pavement markings. And Part 4 is all about your traffic signals. So even with, of course, discussing the pedestrian crossing aspect of traffic signals. And then you have your AASHTO guide for the design of pedestrian facilities. And then you have local design guidance and selection criteria from places like PedSafe and the booklet, some of the booklets that we went over in the last few slides, like the Guide for Improving Pedestrian Safety at Uncontrolled Crossing Locations.
Ray, quick question that's come into the question pod. Was step 4, select countermeasures, skipped? And while you're addressing that, I just wanted to mention that one of the participants put an updated link to the NCHRP 803 report, and I've shared that with everyone. And then there was another question that came in. Since we have Keith Sinclair on as a participant, I actually sent that one out to everyone and asked Keith if he wanted to chime in on that one. So it's out there for you to look at, Keith. But Ray, your question is, was step 4, select countermeasures, skipped?
Of course not. I'm going to get to that. Right?
You say so. We'll be waiting here for you.
I think we did skip it because we led up to it, talk about how we got to that point, and then you're going to use the data to see which one of the countermeasures that we've gone over would help deal with those types of crashes, help lower that kind of crash.
Well, I know we'll be talking about plenty of countermeasures that are being applied in Ohio and how they're selected. So we'll definitely cover that from the Ohio-specific perspective during Caitlin and Jeremy's portion.
Okay, so the STEP guide was produced by looking at various guides and examples across the country, and some of those that were helpful in developing the STEP guide are shown on the screen here from the Virginia DOT Traffic Engineering Division. You know, they have their guidelines for the installation of marked crosswalks. There's a link to that. And of course, you heard me mention City of Seattle several times throughout this webinar. And you can look at the Director's Rule 4-01 there at that link underneath that. And we have the City of Boulder. It's hard to have a pedestrian class without mentioning the City of Boulder and all they've done, but they have a pedestrian crossing treatment installation guidelines. So, and then the PennDOT has their mid-block crossing engineering and traffic study form. So those are very helpful. So, you know, like, yeah, we wish that we could just go to a MUTCD and everything we could possibly want and need would be there, but that's not the case. So, you know, before that arrives, we have all of these sources to help us out with our pedestrian crossing treatments. So then we have step 6. Identify opportunities and monitor outcomes. So there are different ways to implement these treatments. I would just wonder if there's anybody in class today that have examples of how they have implemented pedestrian safety projects. Has anybody in the class? You can mention it in the question box, but have you utilized any of these funding sources that you see on the screen, from the routine maintenance activities to your STIP or HSIP? And then over here you have construct improvements and then monitor results of implementation. Like, after you implemented them, did you track performance measures or obtain public feedback or do more analysis on the crash data? I was wondering about the City of Canton. Is the City of Canton here today as well? Like, they were last time, talking about their road diet.
See, one person said, I've used TAP and CMAC programs for pedestrian projects.
Aha. So that must have been is that from a big city thing? Because it has to do with air quality.
I can't tell you if it is or isn't.
Congestion
Um,
management, air quality, right?
Another person said Hilliard has programmed ped and bike improvements in CIP, also recently applied for HSIP. And then the other person who had mentioned the TAP and CMAC went on to say rail to trail to offset vehicle trips. So that must have been how they got the CMAC funding committed. One
Aha.
person says, I'm currently tracking crash data and doing some educational efforts. Can't remember where we got the funding, as it was a combined source of funding. And unfortunately, with the current COVID situation, their big push on education is on hold.
Aha.
And here the folks from Canton have chimed in. It says the road diets have gone well in Canton. The most noticeable improvement has been slower vehicular speeds. That's always great for pedestrian and bicyclists to have the vehicles going slower.
Do they know what the funding source was for the road diet improvement? Was it multiple sources or?
Give them a second to type in there, Ray.
All right.
No other comments right now, though.
Was it implemented during a resurfacing project?
I'm sure Nick is typing as quick as he can, so you just have to give him a second here. I don't know if you want to keep moving on the materials.
Okay.
We want to make sure Jeremy and Caitlin have lots of time for their part.
Right. Let's take a look at some related everyday accounts Part 5 initiatives. Again, there's a link at the bottom under the FHWA's innovation page about everyday accounts, Part 5. These 3 other initiatives could benefit the STEP initiative. And so I was going to go over some slides, a little bit, but not much into it. But we talk about funding. We want to see a lot of improvements, STEP improvements, pedestrian crossing improvements coming up very soon. So we want to make sure that everybody knows that the funding sources that you could utilize and everyday counts also, they've included these initiatives in everyday counts just to help you along with that. So one of them is project bundling. And another one is value capture, and then also virtual public involvement. So all of these are part of step 5. And so if you go to that page, you can read about that. And as we get through this next countermeasure, then I'll show you some more sources about project bundling and value capture as well, and some places that have successfully utilized project bundling and value capture. Okay, so let's talk about our final countermeasure here as part of the Spectacular 7, and that is the LPI, leading pedestrian interval. And the last I checked, they were still working on the tech sheet for the website, but the current one is still a draft. But they do have some information, like the crash reduction factor for this countermeasure is 59%. And so as you can see in this slide, what it's telling us is that you need a 3-second minimum of the advanced start for the pedestrian to begin walking across the crosswalk. And so that's the minimum. You can have 7 seconds, anywhere from 3 to 7 seconds. And so that's before the vehicles get the green light to go in the same direction. So this is very helpful for older and disabled pedestrians who are slower to start crossings. So let's, I'm going to turn up the volumes here so you can hear this, but there's a volume or a video of the LPI in action. They show some, the beginning part shows what the problem is before they install it, and then you see how it helps the pedestrian towards the end of the video. So this is down in Huntsville, Alabama. So let's, and it even shows how your signal technicians can alter the signal system rather easily if they already have this certain types of signals, and they actually show the signal technician or signal engineer going in there and showing how to adjust the timing to install the extra seconds for the leading pedestrian interval. So let's just check this out.
In the northeast corner of Alabama lies Huntsville, the Star of Alabama, also called the Rocket City, where the U.S. Space and Rocket Center stands tall as a reminder of courage, progress, and success.
I want to see if I can crank this volume up a little bit better. Well, no wonder I had it on 46. All right, so let's go back to this.
We were actually hearing it pretty good, Ray.
Oh, you were?
Yeah, I was anyway. I'm sure. Hopefully the others were too.
I won't turn it up all the way then.
Okay.
Here we go.
In the northeast corner of Alabama lies Huntsville, the Star of Alabama, also called the Rocket City, where the U.S. Space and Rocket Center stands tall as a reminder of courage, progress, and success. In a progressive and expanding city such as Huntsville, the transportation system must be vibrant, safe, and accessible. With Huntsville's dedication to safe travel for all users, it comes as no surprise that the city is focused on improving pedestrian safety. The city uses the leading pedestrian interval, or LPI, to provide an additional level of safety for people walking. The LPI provides an offset or a head start for pedestrians when crossing the street at an intersection before vehicles turn. LPI is low cost, easy to implement, and requires no additional equipment. Better yet, the leading pedestrian interval has been shown to reduce conflicts with pedestrians by as much as 60%. At the intersection of Governor's Drive and Madison Road, pedestrians typically have conflicts when starting to cross the roadway at the same time as the vehicle receives a green light. This frequent conflict can be significantly reduced by implementation of the LPI. The LPI is implemented by changing the settings in the traffic signal controller equipment. Inside the cabinet at Governor's and Madison is a 270 TS2 Type 1 controller. Any TS2 Type 1 or 2 will work. To start, select Controller, then select Timing Plan. The manufacturer's name for the LPI in this controller is Delay Green. Select the time in seconds for each phase where you will employ the LPI. The city of Huntsville uses 7 seconds. That's it, and you're done. Pedestrians should always activate the pedestrian push button. Now that the LPI is active, the walk signal appears 7 seconds before the vehicles get a green light. This puts the pedestrian safely in the crosswalk and in the view of the waiting motorists. Negative impacts to vehicle delay can easily be mitigated with activating controller coordination, phase data, or pedestrian settings. A lagging interval will provide an extended green time for motorists and clear the pedestrian crosswalk. Left-turning motorists are focused on the signal head and oncoming traffic and not on pedestrians in the crosswalk. A no right turn on red may also be used for added protection. The manual on uniform traffic control devices addresses the LPI in section 4E06. The city of Huntsville has nearly 350 signalized intersections, of which 12 have the LPI. Based on results thus far, they plan to do more at select locations. No surprise that the Star of Alabama, whose choice of using the LPI demonstrates that the City of Huntsville is committed to pedestrian safety. If you'd like further information on the LPI and its implementation or pedestrian safety, contact the FHWA Office of Safety or visit their website at safety.fhwa.dot.gov. In the Northeast.
Whoop. All right. That was a pretty good video, wasn't it?
So Ray, I have an additional comment for you from Canton. It says
Okay.
multiple funding sources and project types. Some have been part of larger federal aid projects. Others have been part of local resurfacing projects. We have an overarching complete streets strategy that we implement where possible.
All right. Very good, City of Canton. We give them an A for the day, don't we, Victoria?
Absolutely.
Okay, so they gave you some sources so you can find more information on the leading pedestrian interval, but one was where to find it in the MUTCD in section 4. Remember, part 4. So part 4 is all about traffic signals. So 4E.06, paragraph 19 to 23. So it says if a leading pedestrian interval is used, it should be at least 3 seconds in duration and should be timed to allow pedestrians to cross at least one lane of traffic, or in the case of a large corner radius, to travel far enough for pedestrians to establish their position ahead of the turning traffic before the turning traffic is released. I think the video did a good job of showing the problem there, where you had the car and the pedestrians starting out at the same time, and then the pedestrian jumped a little bit, and then the car had to put on the brakes. So this hopefully eliminates that problem. And then they also showed you a specific kind of controller, signal controller in the video. So there are some implementation considerations depending on the hardware you have and things like that. They sure as heck made it look easy in the video, though, didn't they? I guess it would be if you have that specific type of controller. Where I live in the city of Circleville, I don't think they have that. They still have the pre-timed signals here. So, okay, so vision impairment and APS. APS stands for accessible pedestrian signals. So without APS, pedestrians with vision impairments cross by listening to vehicle movement, and APS is important when either LPI or exclusive PED phase is used. So I guess I don't have to remind the participants about the main ADA principle is that we cannot discriminate against the disabled. So it's very important to take our visually impaired people under consideration for this, maybe add this treatment if at all possible. Makes it easier for them as well. Okay, so mode of operation. So the timing plans for the LPI can be established in different ways. One is the free operations, where it can be actuated by the push button. So it's just added to the overall cycle, which fluctuates per demand. Or we can do fixed time for all cycles, either 24 hours a day or the peak hours of pedestrian crossing, or TOD, which is time of day. So TOD or coordination must be accounted for since vehicular time and coordinated phase like Main Street, will be shortened. Okay, do we have any other input or questions on?
We have a question about the LPIs. This is, do you know if LPIs can be implemented only at certain times of day?
Well, I think what that last slide was talking about was that you have different options to implement it. Either by push button only, which is what the free operations is, or to make it part of the timing program itself, either constantly 24 hours a day or only for peak hours of pedestrian crossings or time of day. So I guess those kind of go hand in hand, TOD or coordination.
Okay, Ray, we're getting awful close to time to turn it over to Caitlin and
Okay.
Jeremy. So,
Would you like to hear a song that the engineer from the state of Maine wrote for this class?
you know, I know that that is an incredibly delightful song, but I think we're going to defer to letting Caitlin and Jeremy talk. And then if we have time at the end, we'll come back to the song.
Okay.
Also wanted to mention that Keith Sinclair, who's one of the national STEP experts, who happens to be as a participant on the webinar today, mentioned LPI time of day implementation depends upon the limitations of the signal controller software. And I'll share that out with everybody. So, all right.
Okay. Well,
Are
I
you
was going
ready?
to show them. Well, I was going to show
Okay.
them some other.
Okay. All right.
Like this would be if you came to ODOT to take this class in person. This is where we would go out and do a field visit and do our own little study. But then I guess we can't do that. But some other things included in a handout is again some more resources for you to look at from Everyday Counts 4, which is the uncontrolled locations, and then 5 where we added the LPI, and then the FHWA pedestrian safety website and the Ped Bike info website as well. I've got a whole and then this gives you the tech sheets for each of the countermeasures. And even at the bottom, you'll see there's some projected costs for these treatments. And then here's the field guide for selecting countermeasures at uncontrolled pedestrian crossing locations with a sample inventory form. And then we have the NCHRP Synthesis 498, which is the application of pedestrian crossing treatments for streets and highways. And then this was NCHRP 841, which shows the development of the crash modification factors for uncontrolled pedestrian crossing treatments. So depending on what your crash data showed and your study of the locations, this would help you select the countermeasure and what your projected reduction in crashes would be for that type of countermeasure. And here's all the different tech sheets. I sent those out yesterday in an email to Redmond, Washington. Okay, so
and we will also make sure to send those out in our follow-up email too to everybody.
Okay, so then there's some more case studies and how they show that there's design flexibility because not every crosswalk is the same, right? Then we got our small towns and rural networks. We have lots of these in Ohio that this guidebook here would be very helpful for those locations. Like Main Street of a small town or small city. It almost looks like Athens, Ohio right there. Then of course, traffic calming or speed management. There's an E primer there and its location at the bottom, the link. And then there's more additional resources for the LPI information on this slide. Then, of course, like I said before, Everyday Counts Part 5 also has information on project bundling, a strategic program delivery solution that saves bundles. So you can find information on project bundling on here. How to, we said this was a systemic approach. So if you're going to have several of these crosswalk improvements all under one project, you're going to save money. So that's the point of project bundling. And you can read more on the Everyday Counts page for that. So it says that bundling projects leverages design and construction expertise and achieves economies of scale. So it works in bridge projects, but also for crosswalk treatments. And then they also they give you some examples from Indiana and Minnesota in here. And then they get into the value capture. So there's information on value capture, capitalizing on the value created by transportation. And so things like tax increment financing, developer contributions, if there's a private project that they have their own roadway improvements, so you can tie these in with them. Sales tax districts, et cetera, different ideas on how they can be used. So that's all I have on my side, Victoria.
All right, as always, you have done a fabulous job, and now we're going to get into Ohio-specific application of the information. So we'll let you mute Ray, and I'm going to switch presenter status over to Caitlin Harley.
All right.
All right, here we go.
Hi there.
How are you?
Good, how are you?
Good. So I want to let everyone know for Caitlin and Jeremy's portion, go ahead and put your questions in the question box. If they are more technical in nature, we are still going to accept them, but we'll be working with ODOT's Office of Roadway Engineering to get you the technical answers that need to go along with those questions. So there we have it. All yours, Caitlin.
All right, great. Well, thanks. This is Kate Harley. I'm with the Ohio Department of Transportation, and I am the Safe Routes to School and Active Transportation Manager. So I just wanted to hop on the webinar today, talk a little bit at a higher level around the Ohio context, talk about pedestrian safety in terms of resources, tools, programs, and also funding that we have available as we think about improving pedestrian safety and implementing proven safety countermeasures like the ones included in the STEP program. So I just wanted to start off to, talk a little bit about why this topic is so important. And it's more than just the 5 bullet points I have on this slide, but we know that walking is an essential transportation option in Ohio. We know that people in communities in Ohio rely on walking in order to get to places that they need to go. We also know that walking and walkability contribute to a lot of really important things: access to jobs, services, and education. We know there's a connection with economic development, quality of life, and just overall the ability to provide mobility options. Related to safety, we also know that pedestrian fatalities have been on the rise in Ohio and across the country. And in 2018, this was actually the worst year for pedestrian deaths in the states in almost 30 years, which is really shocking to think about. And then, we also know that people walking on our roadways are our most vulnerable roadway users. They are more likely to be killed or seriously injured when they are involved in some sort of conflict. So we all know pedestrians don't have airbags. They're really our most vulnerable roadway users. And when we think about reducing roadway fatalities, it's really important for us to focus on those most likely to be killed or seriously injured. And then finally, we know that when roadways are safe for our most vulnerable roadway users, that they really become safer for everyone, and it means we're doing a lot of things right. So just wanted to kind of kick us off with those thoughts. And I'm going to share in my portion today some of the safety trends and insights related to pedestrian safety in Ohio, some of the common crash types and trends related to crashes. And then I'm going to talk through some of the key resources and tools that we have available that communities have access to from a data perspective, and other tools, including things like funding. I'm going to talk pretty specifically about some of the funding that is available through our highway safety program. And then I'm going to turn it over to Jeremy Thompson, and he's going to share more specifically about ODOT's Pedestrian Safety Improvement Program, which is something we kicked off last year and is really an implementation of proven safety countermeasures included within STEP. So I wanted to start off and share some of the takeaways that we have related to pedestrian safety in Ohio. And through the development of our statewide bicycle and pedestrian plan, Walk Bike Ohio, which is currently being drafted this year, we've really done an in-depth analysis of both pedestrian and bicycle safety across the state. And just wanted to hit a couple of the highlights to share with you guys. So in the 10 years between 2009 and 2018, over 1,100 pedestrians were killed while navigating Ohio's roadways, and over 5,000 were seriously injured. So these are high numbers of people being killed or injured. And when we look to understand where these fatal crashes are occurring, we actually see that about 10 counties account for 63% of our severe pedestrian crashes, or fatal and serious injury crashes. So we're definitely seeing this really being clustered in a lot of our larger cities and metro areas. And when we look to understand some of the trends related to the actual roadway types where these are happening, we're seeing a very standout statistic, which is that a majority, about 55% of fatal and serious injury pedestrian crashes are occurring on arterial roadways in Ohio. And arterial roadways only make up about 8% of our roadway network. So there's this hugely disproportionate impact for pedestrian safety on arterial roadways in Ohio. And Jeremy's going to talk a little bit more about how through our programming, we've really been targeting arterial roadways for pedestrian improvements. Some of the other key insights that were documented in our pedestrian safety memo is also understanding that 33% of our fatal and serious pedestrian crashes are actually occurring in some of our highest need block groups in the state, areas where there might be more reliance on non-motorized modes of travel. And actually, these communities only make up about 16% of Ohio's population. So again, a disproportionate impact on these communities of need. And you can just sort of see a little bit of the overlap between areas where there is higher need for walking and biking and areas where we see clusters of severe crashes for pedestrians. Another item to talk about is kind of how these crashes are happening. So understanding what are our most common crash types, what are these typologies that we're seeing, so that we can make sure that we are addressing these types of issues with our countermeasures and roadway design. So the top two typologies really make up almost 50% of our fatal pedestrian crashes in the state, and that is mid-block crossing. So when a pedestrian is struck and killed while crossing outside of an intersection, and then walking along the roadway. So when a pedestrian is walking along the roadway or in the roadway, usually because there is no facility for them, and they're struck and killed. in that location. And then some of the other ones are through vehicle at intersection. So this is when a vehicle fails to yield to a pedestrian at an intersection. The fourth one is secondary crash or disabled vehicle. So this describes an instance where somebody might be getting out of their vehicle on a roadway and is struck and killed in that situation. And then finally, turning vehicle at intersection. And this typology describes a vehicle that has not yielded to a pedestrian crossing as they are turning at an intersection. So the difference is they're not going straight through like number 3, they're actually making a left or a right turn. And again, Jeremy's going to talk a little bit more in depth and share some visuals that make, understanding these typologies really, really clear, and they're really helpful. In addition, Victoria did include our pedestrian safety memo as a link, and she's going to provide that in the follow-up. So it's a decent sized resource. It's definitely worth checking out. And I'll just say too that some of these top crash types or statistics might be different in different communities, but should definitely help to provide some good background on pedestrian safety in our state. And then I just wanted to touch on a couple of the major resources that can be useful to you as you are thinking about, where and how to apply these types of countermeasures. Ray has mentioned it before, but understanding how to access our crash data, understanding some of the pedestrian-related tools we have on TIMS, some of the continued training opportunities we have with our Active Transportation Academy, and then also just pointing you to some resources specifically related to funding. So I'm going to just touch on each of these briefly. We do have a pretty robust webinar and training for those of you who are looking to learn how to access crash data. And I'm not going to deliver that today, but I am just going to let you know that within ODOT's Transportation Information Management System, TIMS, this is where you can access a lot of the data that we have available to our local public agencies. So you can click on crash data search. It will help you to understand how to get a login if you need to do that. But at the end of the day, you're able to look for crashes across the state by typing in the years you're interested in, the crash types that you're interested in. So in this example, I've highlighted pedestrians and pedicycles. So that's people walking and biking. You can also look to understand things by crash severity. So if you want to look specifically at fatal and serious injury crashes, or if you want to understand all crashes of all different types, you're able to do that. And then it's not on the screen, but you'll also be selecting a location. So you're able to run different maps like this. You can select crashes, you can review crash reports, and really importantly, you can export this data and use it for your own mapping or analysis. And you also have the ability to input that data into our crash analysis map tool, which is our CAM tool, which is also included in the training and is really a way to help visualize a lot of this data. So this helps you to run a lot of different queries, analyze the data in a lot of ways. So this is just a quick snapshot to show you some of the spreadsheets involved with our CAM tool and just the tools out there to help you analyze pedestrian crash data. The other tool I wanted to mention, also located on TIMS, is just the ability to look at different map viewers. And we are populating an active transportation map viewer with as much data as we have available. And this is a useful tool. It's just, I think, an easier way to quickly look at bicycle and pedestrian related data available at the state level. And one of those data layers is safety. So you can quickly, turn on and off 3 years worth of pedestrian and bicycle crash data, and just helps to paint a picture of the state of safety in your community. So in this image, I've I've zoomed in to Holmes County. I've turned on a layer for our state and US bike route system, which is also included in the data set. But then you can see that I've turned on the bicycle crashes. So it's 2016, 17, and 18, so 3 years worth of all types of bicycle crashes. And then I did want to touch briefly, just to let you know, for people who are looking for further educational opportunities or trainings related to planning and designing for pedestrians, we do have our Active Transportation Academy. So these are free trainings and workshops that are open to any local jurisdiction. We have instructor-led trainings. We also have more personalized workshops, specifically our creating an active transportation plan and creating a Vision Zero action plan. And we're also adding more trainings to our e-learning offerings. So we have a couple trainings online right now, and we're really working to increase those online at your leisure e-learning offerings. So check that out if you haven't already. Here's a website, as well as my contact information and the program manager's contact information. Okay, so I want to talk just a little bit about funding as well. So on the right-hand side of the screen, you'll see the program resource guide. So this is really ODOT's most comprehensive resource for all funding information, all the different funding programs that we have. And it just gives you an idea of what is eligible, who is eligible, and also gives you contact information for different program managers if you need more information. I like to, often highlight what we consider some of the largest funding programs for standalone bicycle and pedestrian projects in Ohio. I'm not going to talk about all of them today, but I am really going to focus on discussing funding through our Highway Safety Improvement Program, which is funded at about $158 million annually. And the Highway Safety Improvement Program provides funding for safety treatments or corrective activities to alleviate a safety problem or a potentially hazardous situation. So, like I said, this is funded at $158 million annually. It's really one of our largest programs, but it's not the only type of program that can provide funding for bicycle and pedestrian related projects. So I just provided a couple of the other ones. And something to note is that this year ODOT announced that safety funding can be offered up to 100%. So not requiring a local match from local communities, which we know can be very helpful with applications and project implementation. This press release just talked about both the expansion of funding for local governments in doing safety projects, and it also talked a little bit about ODOT's Pedestrian Safety Improvement Program, which Jeremy is going to talk about more specifically. And I think one of the takeaways is to share that our Pedestrian Safety Improvement Program, as we're rolling it out this year, is really an invite-only program working with the municipalities where we see the highest number of pedestrian fatalities. But the approach of looking to implement pedestrian safety improvements systemically across a transportation system is absolutely something that communities should be looking at, and there is funding through the Highway Safety Program to assist with that. So there's really two ways for applying for funds through our safety program. There's the abbreviated safety application and the full safety application. The abbreviated safety applications can be submitted and are considered really on a rolling basis. So really an accessible way that you can, apply for project funding at any time during the year. They do tend to slow down when the full applications are coming in. But these projects are under $500,000, so they're low and medium cost, non-complex, so they're not requiring right-of-way or utility relocations. They're things like our proven safety countermeasures, like the items outlined in STEP, and other things that are similar to that. And they really just require a basic safety justification outlining why this project is going to improve safety. And as Jeremy, talks about the Pedestrian Safety Improvement Program, the items that we've included within this program are absolutely the low and medium cost countermeasures that would be appropriate and encouraged to be coming through our abbreviated safety application. On the other hand, we also have our full safety application. So these are for larger projects. These are capped in the millions of dollars. So they're typically over $500,000. They're typically more complex. And they do require to more formally document a safety risk. But this doesn't necessarily mean that there has to be a documented crash history. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about that. But these full safety applications come in twice a year. They're due in the spring, April 30th, and in the fall, September 30th. So these, more complex projects tend to be, sidewalks, separated bike facilities, shared use paths, and other larger or more complicated projects over $500,000. So when we think about, more formally documenting this safety risk beyond crashes, these are just some of the other indications that you can use to really build your safety case for the highway safety program. So understanding, the layering of these different attributes is really useful. The lack of facilities, other things like speed and ADT or number of lanes. I talked earlier about how arterial roadways in Ohio are presenting a really big risk for pedestrians. So understanding, roadway classification, gaps in our networks, the presence of bicycle and pedestrian generators. For some communities, you might have volume data to be able to include, whether you do local counts or whether you are just accessing some of the activity metrics from things like street light, as well as projects that are in alignment with our state and US bike route system. So that's more bicycle related, but that project is really at its core to improve the safety for people biking. So providing better facilities along that route is absolutely appropriate for our safety program. And then Victoria also included this document and we'll send it in a follow-up, but just wanted to point out that each of our districts has a highway safety district coordinator. So they're really the point person for working with them on a potential safety application. You should absolutely be reaching out to these folks for more information on that, working with them on applications, so that information will be available to you. Okay, so I'm going to turn it over to Jeremy to kind of pick up and talk more specifically about our pedestrian safety improvement program. And then we will also be taking questions, unless Victoria, you wanted to share a couple right now.
I will share a couple as I'm moving things over to Jeremy.
Okay.
One of them is there a main reason behind the increase in pedestrian crashes? They said when they've mentioned it before, many people blame the smartphones or distracted driving. And then the other one, wanted to know if pedestrians have the right of way in Ohio at a mid-block crossing.
Okay. Why pedestrian fatalities are increasing? Great question. It's definitely a combination of a lot of different things. We know there's a correlation between increase in distracted driving, increase in vehicle miles traveled. We know that speed plays a big role in pedestrian safety. There's also been data out there related to the increase in large vehicles on our roadways and sort of the prominence of SUVs and larger vehicles with more blind spots. Is definitely related to land use decisions and context around that. And I would also say just in general, our state experiences a lot of different demographic shifts as well. We have people that are relying more on affordable modes of transportation, walking and biking and accessing transit. We have an aging population, that might also be relying more on those alternative modes of transportation. We have people arriving to our communities that come from other communities where they expect walking and biking and transit to be available. We have people that, want to walk and bike in their communities as well. So really a variety of shifts and definitely not, one single contributor, but I think those are maybe a couple of things to think about related to the rise of pedestrian fatalities. The question about, I believe the question is, do pedestrians have the right of way in mid-block crosswalks? Is that right? So marked
In Ohio at a
crosswalks.
mid-block crossing.
Okay, so in Ohio, pedestrians have the right of way in a few instances. They have the right of way at intersections, whether they are marked or unmarked, and they also have the right of way in marked crosswalks, whether those are at intersections or whether those are mid-block crossings. So if there is a marked mid-block crosswalk, pedestrians have the right of way in those crosswalks. At intersections, regardless of whether it is marked or not, if it is the intersection of two public roadways, pedestrians have the right of way unless there is a signal telling them otherwise. So if it's signalized, they will be given the right of way through the green light or a pedestrian signal. But if it is unsignalized, if it's stop controlled, pedestrians have the right of way. There was a question that came through from a previous webinar related to what it means for a pedestrian to establish their right of way in a crosswalk, which is a really interesting question. It comes up a lot, and part of that is because it's a little bit unclear just in the way that it's written. So within our current laws, it states that pedestrians have the right of way when they are crossing within a crosswalk. So it sort of alludes to kind of placing the burden on the pedestrian to step into the crosswalk to establish their right of way. And there's actually been a bill proposed to address this and change the law to say that vehicles must yield to pedestrians who are, waiting at the curb to cross. So it'll be interesting to see what happens there. But, just to clarify, pedestrians are never able to step off of the curb and right in front of a vehicle or so closely as to be an immediate hazard. But a pedestrian that is crossing within a marked crosswalk or within an unmarked intersection does have the right of way in Ohio.
Sounds great. Now we'll switch over to Jeremy. Thanks, Kate.
Right, sounds good. Thanks.
Awesome. All right. Good morning, everybody. My name is Jeremy Thompson, and I manage ODOT's local safety assistance program and assist in many of our active transportation initiatives as well with Kate. Today, I'm just going to give a brief overview of our Pedestrian Safety Improvement Program, which was a targeted program that involves 8 of Ohio's largest cities to systematically install some pedestrian safety countermeasures throughout those cities. I'll provide some information about how we targeted these 8 cities, some crash metrics and such, as well as some aspects of the project development stage in which we currently just currently started design. Right, so the program need, as you've seen the slide already, fatal pedestrian crashes in Ohio have gone up over the last 10 years. Between 2009 and 2018, we saw a 60% increase in crashes and a 15% increase in serious injuries. In 2019, right now, Ohio had 129 fatal crashes, and that number is suspected to change as we clean out the crash data. In terms of where these pedestrian fatalities have and continue to occur across the state, 10 counties have made up for 63% of all pedestrian fatalities. These 10 counties also make up 53% of Ohio's population. So we're really seeing these serious crashes happen in our urban areas of the state. As Kate mentioned earlier, pedestrian fatal and serious injury crashes are highly overrepresented on arterial roadways. In particular, 4-lane arterials are the most overrepresented facility type. The graphic on the right just shows the number of lanes in the arterial metric. So with the pedestrian safety improvement program, we really wanted to target arterial roads as well as collectors, just to give some just to give the selection process a little wider view. The top fatal crash type at arterial roads is a mid-block crossing. These typically happen on our higher speed facilities. And while this graphic is showing a more urban, complete street style road, we'd see this happening more at our wider, we have a large width of pavement, 40, 50 feet plus. And they're usually happening in urban settings on city maintained roads. We also see walking along the roadway as one of the primary fatal crash types along arterials. These are usually happening in the dark. So that's why we include the lighting as one of our countermeasures within the pedestrian safety improvement program, as you'll see later. And lack of sidewalks is a huge issue for this crash type. And we also see intersection crashes happening a lot. Again, in urban areas, usually we won't find crosswalks marked at these locations where these serious crashes are occurring. And typically it won't be signalized, because at many of our signalized, at least with our modern signals, we see pedestrian signal heads and marked crossings. So now I'll dive into the program itself. The purpose of the program was to provide eligible jurisdictions funding and assistance to implement low to medium cost pedestrian safety countermeasures at high risk facilities. We targeted 8 jurisdictions specifically, with $10 million of funding total spread across the 8. And all these improvements are to be done in a systematic fashion. We kicked off this project in October, should say 2019, I apologize. And through October through March, we went through a location and countermeasure selection process where ODOT, a consultant in these cities, teamed together to pick out specific locations and which countermeasures we should be installing at these locations. And once that list was finalized, we're now into the design phase for those locations. You see this slide again. You've seen it a couple times already, but the solicitation process started when looking at where these fatal crashes were occurring. So in our most urban areas of the state, all 8 cities that are a part of this program belong in the counties depicted in this graphic. After looking at the county level, we were able to dive a little deeper into the city level, and the 8 cities listed here have the most fatal and serious injury pedestrian crashes in the state. These 8 cities make up 8 of the 9 most populous cities in the state, with Parma being the exception. They had their crash numbers were a little lower. And how we allocated the $10 million, we started with a base allocation of $500,000 each, just as a start, and then the rest of it was allocated based off need, which was kind of just we proportioned out the fatal and serious injury pedestrian crashes over the last 10 years to allocate the need base. The process itself, as I mentioned, we finished the planning process just recently, so now we're into preliminary and environmental engineering, which we have task order design to accomplish. We expect this to go through the summer and have final tracings to us in October, November. This is just another way of listing out the process itself. The orange has been accomplished already, and in green, location finalization design is kind of where we're at right now, and then we'll have state-let construction commencing early 2021. The location process itself was primarily done by the cities. We gave them some guidance up front, such as selecting locations on arterials or collectors, and then we provided them with a list of eligible countermeasures for this program. Another caveat to this process, in order to keep the timeline strict, was that locations selected had to avoid any permanent right-of-way takes or major utility or drainage impacts. The eligible countermeasures are listed here. They range from anywhere from fairly simple improvements like marked crosswalks or signage, but also do include some many some more major improvements that are a little more infrastructure intensive, like curb extensions or pedestrian hybrid beacons. Here's just that list continued. And while this program did not fully encompass STEP's Spectacular 7, as Ray's mentioned a few times, with the omission of LPIs and road diets, as an agency, ODOT still really does encourage them. They just didn't fit into this program as much. And we are currently in the infancy of the design stage, as I mentioned, some surveying and some preliminary environmental work commencing as of last week. And right now, 455 locations have been selected across those 8 cities as part of this program, with over 2,000 individual treatments happening across at those locations. Appreciate your time, and if there's any time left, Kate and I are happy to field any specific questions to the highway safety program and active transportation needs.
Yep, there's a couple questions in here, so both of you might want to unmute. The first one, Kate, was actually specifically addressed to yourself. It says, can you address the ped crossings at intersections if they do not push the crosswalk button and get the ped signal, or they do not push the button but cross when the light is green? Do you want further clarification on that?
No.
Okay.
I understand the question. I guess maybe I can get back on that one. You know, I think in general, at signalized intersections, yeah, we're giving the pedestrian the right of way through the signal. That's a good question. I want to say if it's green that it's still giving the right of way, but would prefer to follow up. Good question.
Okay. I'll make sure that you get the information about who asked that.
There was also a question that came up on a previous webinar about the legality of pedestrians crossing mid-block. And so I just wanted to address that as well. In Ohio, it's not permitted for pedestrians to cross mid-block when it is between 2 adjacent traffic signals. But in other locations, if you're not in between 2 traffic signals, pedestrians can cross at any point. They just have to yield the right of way to traffic. So I just wanted to point that out. I think it came up in an earlier webinar.
Yep. And then another question, if an identified agency does not use their PSIP funding, does it filter down to the next highest identified area?
So not this go around, as all 8 agencies identified are participating in it. But this once we learn more about this like streamlining process and we get a little more ingrained in this program, we definitely plan on starting a second phase of this. And like Kate mentioned earlier, this just because an agency or local government wasn't selected as part of this program in particular, our abbreviated application process is a great way to apply for funding for the countermeasures that were listed as part of this program.
I agree with you.
Absolutely.
If it was me,
so
yeah.
Exactly. So communities who have identified locations and countermeasures and treatments that they want to see at those locations, there is funding available through our highway safety program now and throughout the year. Great point.
Another question that's come in. The data showed the percent of pedestrians struck while walking within the roadway on arterials. Does the percent have a breakdown of front and back accidents?
I don't have that data specifically. I think we'd have to really dive into the crash reports for that, because on the report itself and the tabular data we get, it only says that specific crash type, not whether it was from the front or back. So I would be curious to see that as well.
That is the last question I currently have in the question box, so we'll give everybody a second or two to put anything else they have in there. But I want to thank you both very much for your time in not only presenting today, but preparing the presentations and also going through all the questions for the previous webinars. You know, I know it's a tremendous amount of information that has come in, but this is a very important topic. I also wanted to mention that we'll be following up with recording links and also links to all of the handouts that were provided during the webinars. The person that asked that question about the percent of pedestrians said they were just curious. They were always taught to walk against the traffic so you can see it coming at you. That was just their comment box. So.
Yeah, I think some of that information might be documented in terms of going through some of the crash reports internally. It's definitely interesting to understand some of those details in the crash reports, you know, and even like looking into the local context of where those crashes are happening, it can be interesting to understand, you know, why a person, you know, maybe ended up there, and just some of like the land use context in the area was definitely an interesting process. So some of those details could be available if you're really interested in diving in through that on GCAT. So getting a login and running that data will allow you to access those crash reports.
Yep, and that's a good segue to the last thing I wanted to mention was that in the chat section of the GoToWebinar box, I did add a link to our upcoming GCAT webinar that is going to be on Wednesday, May 13th. We're actually doing what we call a double header because there's so many of us out there missing baseball season right now. So we're going to do GCAT and TIMS. Both of those systems will be covered in webinars that day, one in the morning and the one in the afternoon, and the link to register for both or even one of those is in the chat box. So thank you again, and thank you to Ray. I think I partway muted him through here, so I'll mute him real quick too, and he can say thank you or goodbye to everybody. But Ray, thank you too for all you've done for these webinars, and thank you everyone who participated. We appreciated having you on here, and we look forward to having you on a future LTAP webinar. Have a good rest of your day. Take care,
Bye,
everybody.
everybody.